When Harold Lloyd told his friend Hal Roach his idea for Speedy, Roach told him, "It can't be done." What couldn't be done wasn't the story, but where Harold wanted to shoot it. In 1927, Harold Lloyd was America's #1 box office attraction and head of a hugely successful production company. Since 1924, Harold had produced and starred in one blockbuster hit after another: Girl Shy, Hot Water, The Freshman, For Heaven's Sake, and The Kid Brother. For his latest, Harold wanted a whole new atmosphere, far from Southern California. He even considered shooting it in Europe, and he wanted to outdo the thrills of his earlier hits, like the iconic skyscraper climb in Safety Last, and the breakneck chases of Girl Shot and For Heaven's Sake. He decided the only way to top himself was by shooting the next one in New York City. In 1925, Harold boasted having 9,000 extras for The Freshman. Now for his latest picture, he'd have 7 million extras. Lloyd never intended Speedy to be made entirely in New York. Months before Harold headed east in late August 1927, plans were underway to build a replica of a New York neighborhood on 15 acres of land he owned in the Westwood Village section of Los Angeles. The most elaborate set ever made for a comedy, it was to be ready in time for Harold's return in late October. And much of Speedy would be shot on the streets of Los Angeles, doubling for Manhattan. Here he's reading the New York Times, but in L.A. Enlarged, the front page, dated August 7, 1927, reveals a headline about 2 subway bombings, presumed to be reprisals for the Sacco and Vanzetti verdict. The New York and Los Angeles footage were skillfully combined. Lloyd claimed it would take a 20/20 eye to tell them apart. Here a man waves in New York. In L.A., Harold thinks he's hailing his cab, and then pulls over in New York. Though an entire scene with Harold in Times Square was planned, only a few seconds, filmed in front of this subway kiosk, were usable. A camera, hidden in a laundry wagon, jerkily captures him using available light. The rest of the scene had to be shot in Los Angeles. Any eagle eye can spot details that are strictly LA. Street lamps are a dead giveaway. These upright double lamps were common in Los Angeles, but New York is known for its hanging lamps. Traffic buttons were used in LA, but not New York. This curb's too high for New York. Telephone poles lined this LA street, but New York's phone wires were buried underground following the Great Blizzard of 1888. Here's a Safeway grocery store, part of a chain that still hasn't made it to Manhattan. But Gristedes is a New York institution. When you get right down to it, New York has a look that just can't be duplicated, which is why Harold knew he had to come here for real. On August 14, 1927, Harold, wife Mildred, and 3-year-old daughter Gloria set off from Pasadena for LA's Central Station, where they joined the company of 34 traveling with them to the east, including director Ted Wilde, cinematographer Walter Lundeen, and 2 other cast members, Harold's new leading lady Ann Christie and Canine co-star King Tut. Arriving at New York's Penn Station on August 18th, the company set up production offices a few days later at Paramount's East Coast studios in Astoria, Queens, once home to Gloria Swanson and Rudolph Valentino. Vacant since spring, it was now hopping again. Lloyd admitted that filming in New York wouldn't be easy, since he and his writers were used to developing gags as they worked, on the spot. Movie crews on Los Angeles streets were common, So even a big star like Harold Lloyd raised few eyebrows. But in New York, the arrival of the screen's most popular comedian was big news. Harold drew huge crowds wherever he filmed. And all throughout Speedy, you can glimpse onlookers watching the filming. The police in the foreground are actors. The one in the middle of the street is not. He's holding back a mob of spectators. From August to October, Lloyd's second-unit camera trucks roamed the city stealing street shots. These trucks were specially fitted for shooting in traffic, even at rush hour. Adjustable platforms allowed them to shoot from different heights and angles. Scenes in traffic were shot at a slow frame rate to make New York's fast pace look even faster. We've slowed some of them down. A prop hood ornament is mounted to the front of the camera for a more subjective effect, a trick used in Lloyd's Hot Water. One of the things I love about Speedy is not just that it's a New York movie, it's a downtown New York movie. I always assumed the neighborhood depicted in it was the Lower East Side, with its melting pot of Irish, Jewish, Italian, German, and Chinese characters. But in his 1928 book, An American Comedy, Harold talks about setting the picture around Sheridan Square in Greenwich Village on the west side. Sheridan Square and Greenwich Village aren't even mentioned in the movie, and there's no trace of the village's famous bohemian life. No starving artists or unrecognized geniuses. The Westwood set does include a replica of Sheridan Square's small triangular garden. So why was Speedy set in this neighborhood? Because this is where New York's last horse car really did run. The Bleecker Street line once ran right through Greenwich Village, but not this fast. It closed down for good on July 26, 1917. But in the same years, even more traumatic events rocked Sheridan Square. Beginning in 1914, a wide swath was cut through the heart of the village to make way for a new north-south avenue and subway extension. Nearly 200 buildings were torn down. Thousands of residents and hundreds of businesses were displaced. With the opening of the subway here in 1918, rents skyrocketed, driving out even more of the old residents. Some things never change. So by 1927, this wasn't quite the same quaint, close-knit community depicted in Speedy. The Westwood set is modeled on the pre-World War I neighborhood. Old photos were used to create a romanticized notion of Greenwich Village, though you can still see many of the places that inspired it. Including vestiges of when the area was heavily Neapolitan. One village scene was shot much further downtown, in Bowling Green, near the southern tip of Manhattan. Except for the long-gone subway kiosk and the modern glass building at right, the location is much the same today. The trees, just saplings in 1927, are in Bowling Green, the city's oldest park. The curved building on the east side of Broadway was once home to Standard Oil. The same corner is seen later in the chase sequence, but with a clear view of the Woolworth building, then the world's tallest. It can also be seen in the opening title card and establishing shots. Harold and Jane are on their way to Coney Island, so it must be the middle of a New York summer. But the newsstand banner reveals the real date. This love serial started running in Hearst's New York Journal on October 10th, Speedy's final day of shooting. In his book, Harold wrote that parts of Speedy were shot inside the subway. They might have tried filming inside the subway, only to find it too difficult. so the scenes on the platform and train were shot in a studio. New Yorkers would instantly recognize this subway platform as a phony. It's too bright and evenly lit, with tile patterns, pillars, and light fixtures not found in New York subways. Another tip-off is the platform itself. Real New York stations have crawl spaces under its platforms. The same exact set was used the following year in Paul Feos's Lonesome, made in Hollywood. Same tiles, same lights, same pillar. In Speedy, 3 parallel poles are right inside the doors in this shot, but they disappear in the next, suggesting these may be 2 different sets, filmed in different places, maybe different coasts. It's possible that this part of the scene was shot on a standing set at Paramount's East Coast studio. Gloria Swanson filmed a memorable subway scene there only 3 years earlier, on a set that's very similar to Speedy's. The train says Coney Island Express, but as the New Yorker wisecracked in its review of Speedy, you can't get to Coney Island from Bowling Green. Well, you can, but it ain't easy. In its early days, New York's subway system was controlled by 2 privately owned companies, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, or IRT, and the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Corporation, or BMT. To get to Coney Island from the IRT's Bowling Green station via 42nd Street, Harold and Jane would have taken an uptown train to Grand Central, changed to the shuttle to Times Square, where they would transfer to the BMT's Sea Beach Express for an extra 5 cents each, heading all the way downtown again, crossing the Manhattan Bridge over to Brooklyn, and the final destination. Had they gotten on here in their own neighborhood, it would have taken just 6 stops uptown to Times Square for the switch to the BMT. No matter what train they got on, Harold and Jane would have arrived here at Coney Island's Stillwell Avenue station. Harold wanted to hit Coney Island at the height of the season, so he chose it as his first location. It's hard to believe that this was once the entrance to Coney Island's most magical place, Luna Park. Showing up here on Saturday, August 27, Lloyd and Company managed to get a few shots, but then ran for cover when it started to pour. Bad weather kept them idle for nearly a week. Not a great start. They returned the following Sunday, the middle of Labor Day weekend. Record crowds made filming on the streets their first big challenge. A camera hidden in a piano box managed to grab this shot in front of Luna Park before the unsuspecting crowd recognized Harold. Shooting inside the park was easier to control. Harold and Jane ride Luna's airplane ride, the witching waves, the famous shooting the chutes, and the bug ride. To get some of these shots, the crew had to go along for the rides. They also captured these splendid nighttime shots of Luna with its 250,000 electric lights. At Steeplechase Park, they got on the famous Steeplechase ride. They could have gone on the brand new Cyclone, which opened on June 26, 1927, just 2 months before. Or the 7-year-old Wonder Wheel, but they didn't. The other rides, like the Double Dip Slide, the Revolving Drum, and the Human Roulette Wheel, were filmed at Ocean Park Pier, not far from Los Angeles. The boardwalk scenes were also shot on the West Coast, mostly in Venice, California, where Harold gives himself the finger. Wait a minute. Let's see that again. Yep, it's the finger, all right. Sutton Place between 53rd and 59th Streets became fashionable in the early 1920s, and it's still one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods. And it's easy to see why this location was chosen for Speedy. A haven from the noise and crowds only a few blocks away on 1st and 2nd Avenues, it was also convenient to the Lloyd production offices in Astoria via the Queensboro or 59th Street Bridge. This scene under the bridge was later scrapped. Filming on Sutton Place still attracted passers-by, but not as many as in other places. This was shot at Sutton and East 56th Street. Other scenes were filmed just around the corner, near a construction site on 57th Street, a block west of Sutton Place. And here's what they were building. This shot in the same scene, showing Harold's only real New York stunt, was filmed further uptown in Harlem. Even more exclusive than Sutton Place is Sutton Square, a tiny block that runs from Sutton Place to the river. Harold parked his cab in front of this Sutton Square townhouse. A smallish crowd gathers at Sutton and East 58th Street to watch the world's highest paid actor at work. It's here where Harold reads about his idol's appearance at an orphanage on 1st Avenue. He looks up from his paper and there's the Bambino himself right across the street. The actual location of the orphanage was way uptown at Amsterdam Avenue and 136th Street. So Harold is looking across the street from Sutton Square in the East 50s to West 136th Street. The city orphanage was actually the Hebrew Orphan Asylum, founded in 1860. In mid-September, Lloyd's crew showed up to film Babe at a real public appearance. The man behind the megaphone may be director Ted Wilde. Earlier that year, Wilde directed Ruth in the now-lost comedy Babe Comes Home. The next day, the event made the papers, with, curiously, no mention of Harold or his new picture. Harold arrived after the reporters and photographers had already left. He still had plenty of orphans and neighborhood well-wishers to use as extras. The cheers are for real. Both the Babe and Harold were the idols of the day. Harold's cab pulls out on Amsterdam Avenue. In the next shot, it's pulling out in Los Angeles. September 1927 was a hectic month for both Harold and the Babe. Harold was rushing around New York, and Babe was in the final weeks of beating his own 1921 home run record. If we rerun the shot, you can spot one of his teammates, the Iron Horse himself, Lou Gehrig. From September 9 till the end of the season on October 1, the Bronx Bombers played all their regular season games at home. So the busy Babe had a little extra time for picture making, but not much. By the way, this scene from Speedy uses newsreel footage from the previous year's World Series. For the madcap taxi ride, Harold and Babe were actually filmed at different times in different places. The Babe is going nowhere. He's just being driven around and around near Yankee Stadium. This photo shows exactly how the backseat scenes were shot. Though this may look like Southern California, it's the Bronx. Lundeen, Lloyd, Ruth, and Wilde sit on the camera truck. Just visible to the right is the prop half-car Babe sat in while the truck pulled him through the streets. In the rear window, you can see the McCombs Dam Bridge, only 2 blocks away from the stadium. This view of the old Yankee Stadium was photographed on the same bridge. And here it's the backdrop for the reverse angles of the stadium parking lot. Ironically, only a few weeks later, Ruth was involved in a minor car accident on the same bridge. Here are Babe's taxi scenes without the cutaways. All he had to do was mug for less than an hour, allowing plenty of time to get into his pinstripes. He's supposedly imitating Yankees manager Miller Huggins, who was deathly afraid of taxis. The New Yorker critic said he did more acting here than in all of Babe Comes Home. The shots of Harold in the front seat were filmed on Fifth Avenue from about 16th Street to 57th Street and edited with a total disregard for geography. Though it seems like he's driving in midtown traffic without looking, Harold's prop car is being pushed through the streets by the camera truck. Babe and Harold are seen together only in exterior shots of the cab. In this deleted part of the sequence, Harold takes a detour to Sheridan Square to show off his famous cargo. Ruth hit his record-breaking 60th home run on September 30th. 10 days later, newspapers around the country ran this picture of the Bambino presenting Harold with a little souvenir, the 60th home run bat. Only trouble is, the picture was taken when these scenes were shot, more than 2 weeks before the historic homer. It was just a publicity stunt. The bat was actually given to a sports writer for the New York Sun. Today, it's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. On September 22nd, Lloyd's company got away from the mobs by moving to this deserted spot on Kent Avenue in Brooklyn, in the shadow of the Williamsburg Bridge. Even today, it's still a bit off the beaten track, though gentrification is changing that fast. This title card is wrong. It's actually on the other side of the East River. By 1927, the yard here had become a dumping ground, filled with old car chassis and rotting lumber. It had once been part of the Roosevelt Ferry Slip, serving a line that ran from the now-vanished Roosevelt Street in Manhattan to South 10th Street in Williamsburg, then an independent city. By the time this old map was made, the slip had already moved to Williamsburg's Broadway. And by the time Harold got here, it had been abandoned for 68 years. The spot was chosen for both its isolation and for its picturesque views of the Manhattan skyline, and maybe for some symbolic reasons. Once carrying as many as 100,000 passengers a day, East River Ferry service dwindled with the building of the Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Williamsburg bridges. So by 1927, it had gone the way of the horse car. But here's South 10th Street today, with ferry service restored after nearly 150 years. With no big crowds to delay shooting, Harold got a lot in the can here. Then on the evening of Friday, September 23rd, the unthinkable happened. He came down with a cold. It made national news. He was out of commission for nearly a week. Luckily, Harold had filmed most of his own major New York scenes. But the company still hadn't tackled the most difficult part of the shoot, the climactic chase through the streets of New York. In this production photo, it's clear that the driver is a stuntman, a closely guarded secret. A start was attempted in early September, but delayed when 2 horses were injured. Stunt horses were a dime a dozen in Hollywood, but hard to find in New York City. Harold had brought along a Hollywood horse wrangler who scoured the city until 4 suitable white horses were finally found. That was just the first challenge. For each shot of the scene, the police had to clear the streets for what was potentially very dangerous. The horse cars were to hurtle through crowded neighborhoods, and without tracks, they could tip over if driven too fast. Which could be why, if this shot's blown up, we find another horse inside the trolley to give it extra weight. At left, we can actually see Lloyd's camera crew. They're there to film this reverse angle. In filming the chase, though, 2 unplanned events threatened the whole New York enterprise. On Sunday, September 4th, 1927, the same day Harold was at Coney Island, his second unit showed up at Bowling Green, near the southern tip of Manhattan. At 9 a.m., police from the 1st Precinct, here at Old Slip Station, began to rope off the entire area around the Custom House, today the Museum of the American Indian. The police diverted traffic on Lower Broadway and closed off State Street and Battery Place up to about Washington Street. An hour later, Lloyd's crew showed up here to film a dangerous stunt. It was Labor Day weekend with cars queuing up for the nearby ferries. The shoot created a traffic pileup that lasted the whole day. In the scene, the horse car tears around Bowling Green on the west side of Broadway and then races west on Battery Place. Nearly hits a car here and then crashes into the base of the 6th and 9th Avenue IRT elevated station. Here's the scene as it appears in the movie. And here it is slowed down. At right is the Custom House. The car isn't there by accident. This is a stunt car. This crowd isn't there to cross the street. They're watching the filming. Car smash-ups were common in silent comedies, and Harold's were often spectacular. Was the horse car intended to collide with the automobile? Or was it supposed to swerve away and clear the pillar? At this moment, the driver starts sitting down, pulling hard on the reins to clear the pillar. But a horse inside the trolley moves suddenly and shifts the trolley to one side, causing it to hit the pillar. I'm standing at the corner of Battery Place and Greenwich Street, where the accident happened. The L pillar was right in the middle of the street. The one production photo of the incident shows police at the scene following the crash. But is this an accident scene or just crowd control? The company had 2 prop horse cars. Was one intended to be smashed up? Years later, Harold would describe an accident during the making of Speedy, but he was in Coney Island that day. Maybe he was recalling another accident that happened 5 weeks later. On October 10, the company arrived here to get some authentic shots of the neighborhood. Showing up in the afternoon, they managed to get this one shot near the square at 7th Avenue South and Christopher Street. 5,000 people jammed in to watch. Here's a real cop doing crowd control. And here's the same spot today, though partly obscured by a newsstand. Getting closer, we can see that most of the buildings still stand, including the corner cigar store, which opened in 1922. Village Cigars is still a neighborhood landmark. The main objective that day was to film a sensational stunt, a collision of the horse car and an automobile. It could have been the shot they planned to get in Bowling Green weeks before, but instead of the planned accident, the 2 horses, and possibly the horse car and the auto, accidentally slammed into this station. Variety called it an awful crash. The station was badly damaged, which could be why Harold and Jane left for Coney Island from Bowling Green and not here. The stunt drivers were unhurt, and the horses were saved, miraculously. But this put an end to Harold's New York adventure. They called it quits and left the city on October 16th. Speedy was finished on location around Los Angeles and on the Westwood set, with interiors shot at Metropolitan Studios in Hollywood. In December, while Speedy was still in production, the studios had its own disaster. Luckily, Harold's sets escaped the blaze. The New York shoot failed to get Harold doing one of his famous daredevil stunts. So, using horses on a treadmill, they were later faked in the studio as optical process shots, a technique still in its infancy. The Bowling Place accident footage was used by adding these scenes shot in LA. Note these reproductions of IRT L-train pillars. Despite the problems that plagued the New York shoot, the crowds, the weather, Harold's cold, injured horses, Speedy remains one of the most exhilarating portraits of the metropolis ever made. No other silent captures the city's energy or jazz age optimism quite like it. It was a tribute to Lloyd's team, but especially to Harold himself, the personification of the whole era. In September 1927, while Harold was still filming here, the Los Angeles Herald wrote, "New York is changing rapidly, and photoplays like this one will help preserve the old landmarks." For once, they got it right.